Greetings all, not the caboose you're thinking of here. As promised, getting ready to dive into my weapon family of choice, missiles. We're also going to touch briefly on rockets just as a matter of course. There tends to be confusion as to the difference, and if you boil it down, it's quite simple. Missiles are guided, rockets are not. Now we did touch on rockets in the ballistic video, but only in how they relate to the development of ballistic missiles. Take it from me, you can get lost in the weeds on blending of weapon technologies very quickly. So for the purposes of this lecture, missiles are guided, rockets are not. Bam! Done. There's a plethora of missiles out there at this stage in the game, and I'm going to touch on them right now just so you can all drown in the acronym soup that results. Short-range missiles or SRMs, long-range missiles or LRMs. There's also streak SRM and LRM launchers, which effectively have a much more complex and expensive guidance and control system. There are Thunder LRMs, which if anyone's ever scraped out the inside of those little snap things you get as a kid, you'll get the concept. You know what I'm talking about. The little paper wads that you throw at anything hard and they explode. Well, Thunder LRMs take 20 missiles, or whatever size launcher you've got, worth of warheads and puts it all in one missile. And there's Advanced Tactical Missiles, or ATMs, Multi-Missile Launchers, or MMLs, Arrow 4 Artillery, or Arrow 4, also rocket launchers.
Rocket launcher!
There are man-portable versions, battle armor versions, and even torpedo variants. One-shot launchers, improved one-shot launchers, and that's not even touching on all the ammo and missile-assisting hardware out there. And of course, anti-missile systems, or AMS, also exist. What does all this tell us? 1. The military loves their acronyms, and B. Missiles are exceedingly popular as a way to blow someone up. With that, let's peer into the world of self-guided explosive ordnance. Strap in, because this is going to be a fucking rabbit hole. In a previous video, we established that rockets have been around for millennia, but what about missiles? The first record of one being used repeatedly and successfully dates back to Old Terra, mid-20th century, in what they termed at the time World War II, or the war to end all wars. Viewed through the lens of history, it's pretty easy to see that they had no idea what they were talking about, or were deliberately ironic. Glossing over the major points of the war, human suffering and outright genocide, it was a period of incredible innovation. They didn't have digital switching technology, and even the analog computer hadn't quite seen the light of day yet. Somehow, some military researchers, engineers, and what would now be called data scientists had figured out how to take a map of the terrain, print it out, move it at scale, speed, relative to the ground, and use that for the missile to guide itself to the target. No one had a good grasp on rocket engines at this point, but what did work and was incredibly easy to design and manufacture was a pulse jet engine. This used flammable gas in an open cylinder or expansion chamber designed to generate thrust. It looked something like a tuba that was straightened out. It was loud and not very efficient, but it got the job done. The distinct noise it made led to it being nicknamed the Buzz Bomb, with the official designation being the V1 and V2 bombs. When talking about war innovations, the word terrorized gets thrown around a lot, but accounts of people that lived through this time will tell you it's an accurate description. A self-guided flying bomb with no pilot to risk was just about anyone's worst-case scenario at the time, especially because no one knew how in the world it worked until much later, and early warning systems weren't sophisticated enough yet to detect it until you could hear it, which, if you can hear inbound ordnance, it's too late to do anything but duck. Once the dust settled and the war crimes trials ended, some world leader or another pointed to the reverse-engineered schematic and said, like this, but bigger. Now, I covered ICBMs in the ballistic video because those are not guided. They perform a series of pre-programmed maneuvers and can self-abort if necessary, but that's the extent of it. And there were a lot of systems that use this, with or without nuclear warheads. Turns out ballistic arcs are a much cheaper and easier way to get warheads on foreheads than making sure each one can course correct and do rapid object detection. Which, this worked fine for ground targets, not so great for the airborne ones. With the atmospheric fighters getting faster and faster, sometimes quite literally by the day, suddenly running one down and shooting it with bullets wasn't nearly as viable as it once was. Engagement times and durations were quickly pushing the limits of human response times. This meant computer assistance, and it also meant guided munitions. By the next couple wars, with the increasing need for both air superiority and aerial denial, we had two more or less working classes of anti-air missiles. Surface-to-air, or SAM, and air-to-air, or air-to-air. The earliest and most prolific of these was the infrared guided air intercept missile, commonly known as the Sidewinder. Believe it or not, despite this design being 1,000 years old, it's still quite commonly used. The specifics of how it works aren't incredibly important, but the gist is, once launched, it can detect, lock on, and track an infrared signature until it either strikes the source or runs out of fuel. Due to things like the inverse square law, this wasn't a very long distance weapon, but its simplicity and effectiveness have given it great longevity. One thing that happens when a munition is self-guided is that research time and money is immediately dumped into fooling the guidance system. Let's face it, being able to push a button and watch the enemy's very expensive kill stick explode harmlessly behind you is a satisfying feeling. About 3.5 decades later, when computers were starting to be found in the average home and supercomputers were a thing, the Advanced Medium Range Air-to-Air Missile, or AMRAAM, was created, tested, certified, and mass-produced. The key difference was how it tracked and engaged a target. IR, or infrared signatures, could be faked, dispersed, or lost when crossing areas of thermal instability. This instead used radar. Early versions of this as an externally guided missile were a thing at the inception of the Sidewinder, but they depended on a signal from the launching aircraft to designate a target to follow. If that signal was lost, quickly the missile could be too. The version that I'm talking about could generate its own radar signal to follow. The target is designated at launch, and once dropped from the rack, the missile does the rest of the work, making it like modern-day streak munitions. It locks the radar signature and produces its own signal to follow. This is one of the earliest examples of LRMs, having a range of up to 20 kilometers. The key reason why it could reach such longer distances is that it was already in the air and moving at close to supersonic speeds, making it have to expend very little energy to breach the sound barrier and follow a target. It also put the engagement range past what the pilot could see, referred to, creatively, as Beyond Visual Range, or BVR. With that in mind, why are modern LRMs pressed to go a kilometer? Well, money. One of these self-guided missiles would cost about 62,500 C-bills in today's money. This is with full-scale production on a line with the kinks worked out. Never mind how much it cost to prototype and finalize the design. By comparison, modern LRM ammo costs 250 C-bills per missile, or 30,000 per ton. Good weapons are good, but sometimes quantity is way better than quality. Just ask the clans. The old V-1 rocket had been modernized about the same time, using satellite positioning and low-altitude flyovers to strike its target. A destination was given, followed by a launch command, and it did the rest of the work. It would accelerate to speed, and once near its target, it would kill its own thrust and coast in, giving it the name cruise missile. With variable warhead configurations, launch platforms, and even physical shapes, this was a popular replacement to offshore artillery. The ship could fire one of these things off without even having to stop, then turn around and hightail it out of there before it even reached its target. This contrasted the V-1 and later V-2 missiles, which needed a fixed launch point due to how they navigated to their targets. There was a man-portable ground-to-ground missile that was shoulder-fired. It had 2 rocket stages. The first propelled it out of the launch tube to reach a safe distance from the operator, and also angled the nose up. The second propelled it to roughly a 150 meter altitude, and from there it would direct itself to land on a target designated at launch, all determined visually. It had a maximum range of 2.5 to 4 kilometers depending on the version, and this is on a perfect day with all ideal conditions. Optimum engagement range essentially had to be determined by the operator on the fly, and this is not a fun thing to do while also trying to figure out if the tank with direct fire capability at the same range has seen you or not. This missile is the Javelin. Once spaceflight became a factor, development shifted gears rapidly. First, supersonic missiles were designed to be launched from small, high-altitude fighters to shoot down satellites. This was before modern armor, or any armor at all, was able to be put into space, so a low-yield warhead was more than enough. And in wartime, this could also be used to create a cloud of shrapnel to further frustrate the enemy. And civilians. Also your own military. Look, this was not a time of perfect solution. It was a time of, let's see what fucks up when this explodes. When spaceflight became easier and payloads larger, Suddenly targets were armored, which required bigger or more sophisticated warheads. These more advanced systems made their way back to the ground level, where they were improved for that engagement area, and back and forth they went until they reached relative performance parity no matter where you were. Until warships were created. Suddenly, what was a vessel-destroying blow became something like tossing a popped corn kernel at an armor plate. This led to the research into so-called ship-killer missiles. That category quickly stopped being labeled as so-called the minute the first killer whale anti-capital ship missile was fired. One missile weighs 50 tons. I'll give that a minute to sink in. You are launching the mass equivalent of a fully loaded hunchback at another ship. This missile is tele-operated, which means it's remote guided, so not technically a missile, but not an unguided warhead either. It falls into the gray area and hasn't been covered yet, so I thought it was fitting to mention it here. All of this distilled down into two basic missile types. You had a 1 kilometer range and limited guidance in warhead, or a shorter engagement range with a larger warhead. These were dubbed long-range missiles or short-range missiles, and formed the backbone of militaries, mercenaries, and pretty much any fighting force you could mention. So, let's dig into what made these two launch systems so popular above all others. So, you have your two basic missile systems, LRMs and SRMs. Short, to the point, descriptive, and effective. By standardizing launcher and munition types across the board, they quickly replaced proprietary and specialized solutions. From a cost perspective alone, this is a smart move. Not just parking a warhead where you want it to go, but also being able to salvage or pillage the ammunition you need from almost anyone who uses the same weapon, which was just about anyone because they are staggeringly affordable. War, however, has a tendency to breed complex problems and innovative solutions. It does this by dusting off old ideas and giving them a new application. Napalm, for instance. Napalm, for those who don't know, is a bit like taking silly putty and making it more flammable than gasoline or petrol. This is used extensively for clearing troops out of buildings or forests or anywhere they might be hiding, really. It's a grisly reality that few things are more effective against infantry than massive amounts of long-burning fire, even more so with the fuel source that is stickier than jelly and gets into more places than melted chocolate in a brand new car. However, armies and soldiers were getting better and better at shielding themselves from this kind of attack. So the annual War Crimes Committee decided to take an SRM, scoop out the warhead, and fill it with a special variant of napalm that has its own oxidizer, letting it burn in oxygen-deficient environments. This was dubbed an Inferno round, and rightfully strikes terror into anyone's heart that might be shot with it. Infantry, battle armor, tanks, and mechs, this will cook them all. It burns hot enough to etch ferrofibrous armor and almost melt normal steel. If you don't want to wait for it to burn itself out, and let's face it, who would, the only other option is to dive into some deep water, as this gel doesn't mix with it at all and will sit on the surface, cheerfully burning away. This is a fantastic weapon system for infantry to deploy against mechs, and horrifying the other way around. Side note, ammo explosions with these rounds suck as much as you'd think they would. But that's just one of many things that 5 guys in a plunger managed to cram into a live round, so let's expand on the rest, and then we'll get into the specialized launchers. After Infernos are acid or AX warheads. They were aimed at clan ferrofibrous armor. Someone came up with a cocktail that when it touches their specific material composition turns into a voracious acid that does nearly double the damage to the armor as a conventional warhead.
That crap's gonna eat through the hull.
The downside is, if you hit a target without ferro armor, it does less damage because part of the warhead was removed for the liquid payload. Initially, this gave some units a real advantage against the clans during the height of the invasion. Because it was chemical and not explosive damage, it also made repairing it a bitch due to contamination. If proper cleaning procedures weren't followed, the new armor would be contaminated and become weaker over time. Listen Kill or LK missiles listen for EM radiation and home in on its source. Meant to go after mechs with advanced warfare electronics, ECM active probes, C3 computers, they were quickly reverse engineered and countered just through some mild reprogramming of these systems. However, they netted a substantial increase of rounds on target up until that point. Anti-radiation missiles, an upgrade to the LK guidance, aren't quite what they sound. It's not missile-delivered radiation containment, although in a sense I guess it is a radiation eliminator. Referred to as ARAD missiles, these were designed to home in on radiation, any and all. EM, gamma, alpha, whatever. It's designed such that ECM attracts these missiles, so does an active probe, Artemis, C3, etc. Anything that pumps out more EM radiation becomes a stronger source for this missile to lock onto. These are SRM and LRM compatible. Anti-triple strength Myanmar, or TSM missiles, are a throwback to when TSM was leaked to the Capellans knowing it had a weakness to this gas to be exploited later. It was a calculated move. If you've got an armor breach and wander through a cloud of this gas, it condenses on the Myanmar strands and eats right through them. However, what the Davion scientists and military strategists didn't think of was Capellan research teams correcting this flaw, which they did. That rendered whole stockpiles of this ammo worthless. In fairness though, it did work for a short time to cripple invading mechs. These were only compatible with SRMs though, so when they found out suddenly their surprise attack was no longer a surprise, it was at a range where it was far too late to do anything besides scream. Deadfire missiles, or DFM rounds, scooped out some propellant, scaled back the guidance hardware, and packed in a larger warhead. Drawback: range is reduced by roughly a third, and they're more prone to scattering off target. Benefit: double damage for LRMs, 50% more damage for SRMs. Follow the leader rounds are available for LRMs. One missile in the flight is designated the leader, and all the others follow it. Benefit: if one missile hits, they all hit. It's frankly freaky to watch, especially from something like an LRM-20 where they tunnel through the target like a swarm of really pissed off yellow jackets. Downside is similar. If one misses, they follow it too, which is more akin to watching slapstick combat. Frag missiles are produced for LRMs and SRMs, which are like an airburst fragmentation warhead to be used against infantry. Benefit: a small flight of these will delete a platoon of non-battle armor infantry. Drawback: if there is modern armor coverage of any kind, this missile will do little more than scratch the paint. Heat seekers do exist for SRM and LRM launchers, and paired with Inferno rounds, they make a really deadly 1-2 punch. They depend on mechs overheating to home in on, so make sure the mech you want dead is the hottest thing around. The inverse is true though, other heat sources will greatly confuse them and lead to them tumbling off course and exploding. Their relative simplicity has allowed them to remain effective and relevant for over 1,000 years. I'll pause for a moment while that sinks in. A guidance system that has remained not just popular, but combat effective for 1,000 years. Incendiary LRMs are used to start shit on fire. These were used to a fantastic degree during Tukiyid. Clans running through trees, torch them. If they keep running through the trees, their cooling tech starts to get stressed, and psychologically so do the pilots. If they turn around, then you're diverting entire battle groups with minimal effort. They work similar to tracer rounds with the large phosphorus payload. This does reduce their effectiveness against armored targets, and ammo explosions are still a real problem, but they are unparalleled for giving a rapid response strategic edge. Magnetic pulse, mag pulse, or EMP warheads are designed specifically to overwhelm targeting and tracking systems, but had an unplanned side effect of weakening the magnetic shielding inside fusion reactors. This had two main benefits. It disrupted the ability for a pilot to actually hit anything but the ground for 10 to 20 seconds, and the reactor put out a proportionate increase in heat per the number of rounds that struck and the size of the warhead. LRMs added one single heat point on the scale per impacted round, and SRMs doubled that. Engines produced after these were manufactured added newer types of engine shielding that negated this effect. They are still popular for their ability to disrupt nearly every other system, however, production ceased in 3065. Getting out of alphabetical order a bit, Thunder LRMs house dozens of tiny mines per missile. They explode over the ground and scatter these mines. Very popular with Capellans as they lack the numbers of many other house militaries. Able to deploy just about any kind of mine you want, vibration sensing, active mines, even inferno mines. However, they deal zero direct damage. Typically, units meant to deploy field artillery scatterable mines or fast-cam rounds have multiple ammo bins. They deploy mines to their designated zones, and if those mines are depleted, they'll deploy more later, providing standard fire support in the meantime. They do take up more space, leading to roughly half as many missiles per ton. They tend to vaporize legs of light mechs though, so most people consider the trade-off worth it. Mine-clearing missiles were developed by the Federated Suns as a response. They do what it says on the tin. No real damage to anything, but they explode the hell out of mines. Now we've gone over a lot and we're a little past half done. I think by now you're starting to see just how versatile the humble missile launcher can be. Semi-guided LRMs work with target acquisition gear, or TAG, to designate a target to home in on. Without TAG, they function like normal LRMs. With it, well, sticking with the pissed off yellow jacket swarm analogy, imagine that swarm turning mid-flight to follow you no matter how fast you run. Yes, really. Able to track and hit targets going up to 200 kilometers an hour, these will wreck your day. Drawback is they are roughly 3 times as much as standard LRM rounds and generally don't exist outside the Free Worlds League. Smoke warheads for LRMs and SRMs are a thing. No one knows why. Developed with the idea of negating clan targeting and tracking hardware, the smoke can fill a 30 by 30 meter area 6 meters high for about 6 seconds, assuming you're using an LRM-5 or SRM-2. Bigger launchers mean longer lasting smoke, but it tends to drift and dissipate all the same, and most mechs over 50 tons are tall enough to see over the cloud, so your mileage may vary greatly. Very effective against infantry and ground vehicles, mixed results on everything else. Swarm LRMs were made to maximize damage output. LRMs are notorious for not all hitting the target, so someone updated the guidance parameters in a way that made the rounds that missed the target lock on to anything within 30 meters and hit it instead. They do this quite well, but what the designers didn't account for was the fistfight range, so friendly fire happened. A lot. This led to Swarm I rounds, which added an Identity Friend or Foe, or IFF, discriminator which cut back on friendly fire incidents. However, just due to the nature of the battlefield and things like electronic warfare, this was not perfect. Mechs that deploy these rounds also tend to have alternate ammo bins for when friendly forces start to mix it up point blank. Tandem charge or TC rounds are beautiful. Containing a shaped charge and a conventional explosive, these would punch a hole through the armor and exploit that hole at the same time. This occurs too fast to see, but the result is potentially frying internal hardware with every hit. The idea of taking out that Daishi via engine hits without having to scrape all the armor off first was too good to pass up. And they worked too, quite well. Intersphere forces innovated to negate these with hardened and reactive armor. Clan ferrolamellar armor, essentially scaled down warship armor, would also be available by 3070, however it's exceedingly rare and difficult to produce. Lastly, for our conventional launchers, tear gas rounds were made for SRM delivered payloads. Non-lethal to a degree, these do what you'd expect. They deliver a blinding cloud of tear gas for crowd control. Designed to detonate away from people, they count on the gas cloud drifting into the designated area. These are typically only deployed by security mechs like the Copper, for example. Need a bit of a break after that. Now the advanced launching systems. We have ATMs, MMLs, Thunderbolts, NARC, and Arrow 4. Advanced Tactical Missiles, or ATMs, are a clan response to all the advanced munition types they were getting hammered with. See, clan leadership was continually frustrated by the fact that they were never attacked the same way twice. Those of you who aren't familiar with clan tactics, let's take a look at pre-Space Age battles, which took place largely with black powder muskets. See, like the clans, the leaders of armies considered things like ducking or moving while fighting dishonorable, so they would command their forces to stand in a straight line out in the open and shoot, expecting the enemy to do the same. Intelligent enemies would be more concerned with winning and would absolutely not follow this ridiculous, stupid, ill-conceived
1 hour later.
And with a goddamn pig. So when they realized they were starting to lose more than they were winning and whining wasn't working, they actually innovated. These could hot swap between 3 ammo types: extended range, standard, and high explosive. ER rounds added 30% onto the range of the LRMs with the same damage. Standard did the same damage as SRMs, but at near LRM range, and high explosive did 50% more damage than SRMs at the same range. Coming in at 3, 6, 9, and 12 rack varieties, this versatility and damage capacity was enough to tip the odds back in their favors. For a little while at least. The Intersphere military research teams didn't really have the ability to invent and standardize 3 ammo types in such a short time span. But what they did have, as a direct result of all the missiles floating around, was outstanding ammo feed technology. They very quickly spit out the MML, or multi-missile launcher. In concept, quite simple. This lets you toggle between LRMs and SRMs for a single launcher, something that wasn't possible before. Coming in at 3, 5, 7, or 9 tube launch systems, they could also digest any special munitions designed for either missile type. The NARC missile beacon was a complicated missile-delivered grappling pod. When near the target, it would deploy a magnetic claw, latch on, and emit a signal that could cut through basic ECM and allow missiles to track it. This was quite the innovation, able to be tailored for more than just missiles. With more advanced ECM suites like the Angel system, it got upgraded munitions to keep it relevant in the battlefield. Some of these are pretty straightforward. The ECM pod produces a local ECM effect, however temporary. The explosive pod explodes, shredding a quarter ton of ammo per hit. Bola pods are different. Very, very different. An explosive charge goes off near the target that does two things. It deploys a chain, and it ignites a rocket on either end. The purpose is for this chain to wrap around the intended target, tangling and potentially tripping it mid-run. Capellan designed, this wasn't a bad idea overall. However, its effectiveness was limited to lighter biped mechs. Due to that and its inaccuracy, it never really exited the prototype phase and was quietly buried. The Haywire pod was similar to the EMP warheads, just bigger. It doesn't affect engine shielding, but it takes out all other advanced electronics and screws with targeting and tracking hardware. This can be scraped off by another unit, potentially risking damage to whatever it's attached to. A timed or remote detonated pod named Shoot and Sit was briefly toyed with. The idea of attaching a bunch of these from multiple sources and detonating them all at once had merit, but in practice was too difficult to be effective. The Nemesis pod is peak electronic warfare. Once deployed, this would override all TAG, NARC, or other tracking hardware. All missiles, friendly or enemy, would immediately home in on this pod. Enemy rounds homing in on enemy units would have reduced accuracy due to the complexity needed to override the IFF readings and maintain it, but the line-breaking panic that would ensue from seeing flights of missiles from both sides divert and chase one target was game-changing. One thing that really made the Nemesis pod terrifying was the return of Arrow 4 artillery. This was a single missile with a warhead so massive it created a 90-meter explosion that would at best damage all units in that area, and at worst knock them down and add fall damage to their concerns. They have their own special munitions to choose from, which are as followed. Air defense, tailored to go after air units. Homing, compatible with most target designation methods. Standard, spot, fire, boom. Thunder or fast cam, like the LRMs, but bigger. Illumination or flare, you better know what that does. Laser inhibiting, glitter bomb. No, really, it's a whole bunch of glitter that reflects and refracts laser light in a huge cloud. Inferno, what I call SNR or shit and run, because first you say it, then you do it. And smoke, for all your rock concert needs. There's one final round that really shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, and it's called the Davy Crockett, otherwise known as the nuclear option. Clans don't like property damage, but here in the Sphere we collectively said fuck it, so this is generally not available to clan forces. Yes, it is an Arrow 4 deployed tactical nuke.
Arrow 4, brought to you by Fuckatol, the makers of Geritol. When you're ready to burn a bridge and nuke the ashes. Arrow 4.
Thunderbolt LRMs have slightly shorter range than standard LRMs, however their benefit is that they combine all that damage into one single missile. You could deliver an AC-20's worth of damage to one location at 450 meters, compared to the autocannon's max effective range of 270. MRM or medium range missiles bridge the gap between SRM damage capability and LRM flight numbers. Available in racks of 10, 20, 30, and 40, this fired missiles with simpler guidance systems and a massive flood of ordnance, and the same damage per missile as LRMs. Accuracy by volume wins the day, and the extreme launcher size can quickly overwhelm AMS hardware. Enhanced LRMs or NLRMs reduce the arming distance needed for LRMs. They're a little heavier than standard launchers, but again, trade-off. Instead of 180 meter minimum range, it's down to 90 meters, the same as an AC-5. They can use common alternate munitions just like other LRM launchers. Extended or ELRMs have roughly a 50% range boost, going all the way out to 1100 meters max effective range versus a conventional LRM's 630. These launchers are large, heavy, and require their own ammo as well. They also have the same boost to minimum range, meaning the warhead doesn't arm itself until it passes 300 meters. Rocket launchers, or RL racks, are kind of an oddball. They have 10, 15, or 20 racks and can only be fired once. They don't really fit in anywhere, but I included them here because it's the closest category I could find. Slightly shorter range than LRMs and the same damage output, their claim to fame is how unbelievably light they all are. An RL-10 rack weighs just half a ton, and an RL-20 is a ton and a half. You've got your streak missiles, which really aren't compatible with other ammo types, are available in SRM varieties for us Inner Sphere folks, and both LRMs and SRMs for the clans. Double the weight of the standard launcher, these have a couple things going for them. If you have no lock, they don't fire, which gives you built-in ammo conservation. And if they fire, they hit. All of them. While heavy and expensive, the ammo savings and increased damage per shot generally tips the scale in favor of, where available anyway. Little known are retro streaks. Similar to noisemakers that you'd see on a submarine, when a streak lock is detected, these tiny missiles automatically launch with the same signature that produced the lock. Then, off they fly, taking the streaks with them at best, and at worst breaking their lock and defaulting their guidance to standard SRM mode. Standard SRMs, LRMs, and streak SRMs are also available in one-shot varieties. You get one salvo to fire and you're done. Gives you a one-time extra punch if needed. One piece to go with this is bolt-on targeting and tracking hardware in the form of Artemis 4 and 5 fire control systems, usually just referred to as Artemis. This would communicate with compatible rounds in real time, directing more of them to impact the target. It weighs an extra ton per launcher, but most saw the increased damage output as worth the weight. MRMs have a similar system dubbed Apollo that offsets their inherent inaccuracy. One final note is underwater munitions, classically known as torpedoes. Long-range and short-range varieties exist, LRTs or SRTs. No special munitions are available for them, however, the clans have developed for their battle armor multi-purpose missiles which can function in or out of water / other liquids and even transition between them. Also available in long and short varieties, the ability to launch a missile from 300 meters away into a lake that's currently cooling a mech and hit that mech is a fantastic way to deny an enemy that strategic advantage. Quick note on anti-missile systems. You've got two kinds, ammo and laser-based. Ammo-based is a high rate of fire minigun that throws as many rounds as possible in front of a missile flight, hoping to knock some out. The laser variant targets each one with a modified small pulse laser. Both are equally effective, the difference is whether you want to carry extra ammo or heat sinks. With the ludicrous amount of munitions to choose from, there's a similar amount of platforms to go with them. However, mostly for time constraints, I'm just going to list some easily recognizable and likely to be encountered units, starting with tanks. SRM/LRM carriers are two sides of the same coin. Loaded up with either LRM-20s or SRM-6s, these somewhat slow-moving tanks house enough ammo to wreck almost anyone's day. Weighing in at 60 tons and its top speed of 54 kilometers an hour with an internal combustion engine, they can launch 60 LRMs or 60 SRMs per volley. They generally stock enough ammo for a full minute of sustained fire and are easily reloadable thanks to a magazine-like system. There are also Aero 4 and MRM variants, but the SRM and LRM combo has persisted before the Star League, and due to the simplicity of their design will likely be around for centuries to come. Most alakablam per C-bill. The Longbow is an 85-ton assault LRM platform, able to shoot 50 LRMs per volley. However, ammo supply is an ongoing concern as prolonged battles will exhaust a missile supply rapidly. You've got twin medium lasers as backup, and with a top speed of 54 kilometers an hour, that's about as much comfort as you think it is. The Archer and Catapult are common and effective heavy mech designs. The Archer mounts twin LRM-20s and the Catapult twin LRM-15s. Both designs have been around longer than 5 whole centuries and due to that have almost an endless number of variants. The original models are still quite common due to their sheer effectiveness and relative affordability. The clans took an old Inner Sphere design, the crossbow, and turned it into a rarity, a fire support Omni-Mech. Based around LRMs, its primary configuration is 2 LRM-20s with Artemis, and all subsequent variants include LRMs in some capacity. Due to the lack of a minimum range, this is a surprisingly effective design. What's even more surprising is Clan Steel Viper embracing fire support. A response to that is the popular Free Worlds League Yeoman, quite literally missiles on legs. With twin LRM-15s and 10s, it can send 50 LRMs downrange at every trigger pull. Faster than the longbow, but weaker in nearly every meaningful way, this is meant to fire off its ammo complement and book it back to the resupply area. Just make sure you don't fall over. The Whitworth and Trebuchet are popular medium fire support offerings. Able to launch 20 or 30 missiles respectively, both are generally plagued by compromises when it comes to heat dissipation. Nevertheless, they are a popular budget option for your fire support needs. There's a surprising number of light mech offerings as well, usually in the forms of variants rather than dedicated platforms. However, one of my long-lasting favorites is Valkyrie. With a single LRM-10 and medium laser, as well as a top speed of 86 km an hour and 180 meter jump range, this is a somewhat fast-moving, highly mobile light fire support platform. Cheap, rugged, and easy to repair and rearm, this mech is a welcome sight to small armies, mercenary units, and militias everywhere. Holy crap, that was a lot to go through. I usually drop more funny phrases or even more expletives, but there's just too much to cover to spend too much time doing that. Also, there is a metric fuck ton of fire support mechs out there, but much fewer whose primary intended purpose is direct and indirect missile support. Just covering the weapons themselves was quite the endeavor. Covering every mech that uses them would probably necessitate 2 separate videos. Nevertheless, I hope this has helped spread my love of missile weapons, especially at long ranges. My ride of choice will always be my catapult. Clan LRM-20s, Intersphere ER mediums, plus Clan XL and... Really, Warp?